He slept without clothes, and a wild frontier girl claimed him forever. Ethan had been walking for hours, maybe even days. He had lost track. The frontier stretched endlessly around him, a vast landscape of rolling hills, forests, and dusty plains that seemed to go on forever. The sun was beginning to dip behind the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. His legs ached, his back throbbed, and a deep weariness had settled into his bones. He had traveled far, but he still had no destination, only a hope that somewhere out there he might find rest. He spotted a small clearing ahead, and just beyond it, a cabin stood alone, looking as if it had been abandoned for years. The roof sagged slightly, and vines had crept up its sides, but it seemed solid enough. Ethan's eyes lit up. Shelter, finally. He stepped carefully over the uneven ground, each footfall heavy with exhaustion. He opened the creaking door and was greeted by the smell of old wood and dust. The cabin was simple, with a rough wooden table, a small fireplace, and a bed in the corner. Nothing fancy, but it was shelter, and right now, that was all he needed. Ethan wasted no time. He dropped his worn pack by the door and peeled off his layers of travel-stained clothing. His body was sore from the long journey, his muscles stiff from walking miles without proper rest. He stepped into the small bed, the mattress lumpy but inviting. For the first time in days, he let himself close his eyes without worry, letting sleep come over him in a heavy, uncontrollable wave. The chill of the evening air crept into the cabin, brushing against his skin, but he didn't care. Exhaustion had made him careless. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Birds settled into their nests for the night, and a distant wolf howled, a sound that made the vastness of the frontier feel even larger. Ethan, deep in his unguarded sleep, did not hear it. He was a man stripped of defenses, both literally and figuratively, at peace in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. Morning came slowly. The sun had just begun to peek over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow through the cabin's cracked windows. Ethan stirred, stretching and rubbing the sleep from his eyes. That's when he heard the sound, a sharp intake of breath, followed by a hurried shuffle. His eyes snapped open, and he sat up, blinking against the sunlight. There, in the doorway, stood a girl. She was unlike anyone Ethan had ever seen. Her hair was wild, a cascade of chestnut waves that fell past her shoulders. Her clothes were practical for life in the frontier, but they had a lived-in quality, patched and worn from constant use. Her eyes were wide and bright, taking in the scene before her with a mixture of shock and curiosity. She had clearly not expected to find a stranger in her territory, or at least not in such an exposed state. Ethan froze, his cheeks flushing as he realized the obvious. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The girl, however, did not seem offended. Instead, there was a flicker of amusement in her eyes, a spark of daring that made her expression almost playful. She tilted her head slightly, studying him like a wild animal studying an unfamiliar creature. I didn't mean to intrude, Ethan managed finally, his voice rough from sleep and fatigue. I was just looking for a place to rest. The girl's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Seems like you found it, she said, her voice confident, steady, and just a little teasing. She stepped closer, not seeming concerned with propriety or rules. Her presence was bold, like the wilderness itself, untamed and unafraid. Ethan shifted on the bed, suddenly aware of every inch of his vulnerability. But there was something about her, something fearless and genuine, that made it difficult for him to feel embarrassed for long. He swallowed hard and wrapped a blanket around himself, trying to cover more than just his body, his pride as well. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to reclaim some sense of control in the situation. "Clara," she replied, as if no introduction was necessary. She glanced around the cabin, her eyes sharp and perceptive, taking in every detail. "You're far from the town. Not many people wander this far out, especially not alone." Ethan nodded. I didn't have anywhere else to go." He felt the words heavy on his tongue, almost foreign. He was a man who had spent most of his life moving, never staying in one place long enough to form attachments. Trusting anyone had never come easily to him. Clara seemed to sense this. She didn't push, didn't try to pry further. Instead, she nodded and took a step back, giving him space while still watching him carefully. "Well, you'll need food and water before you go any further," she said finally. "And maybe some clothes, if you plan to stay around humans." There was a hint of humor in her tone, but it was gentle, not mocking. Ethan allowed himself a small smile, grateful for the softness in her words. "Food would be appreciated," he admitted. "And water, too." Clara moved quickly, almost like a shadow, gathering a few things from her own pack that she had set down outside. She returned with a small loaf of bread, a jar of water, and a rough tunic that looked like it had been stitched from various scraps of fabric. "It's not much," she said, handing the tunic to him, "but it'll keep you from freezing at least." Ethan took it, feeling the warmth of human kindness in a way he hadn't felt for years. He dressed quickly, the fabric scratchy but comforting. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was more than just a lone traveler. He felt noticed, seen, in a world that often ignored him. They ate together in silence for a few minutes, the kind of comfortable silence that doesn't need words. The cabin was quiet except for the soft crackling of the fire, and for the first time in days, Ethan felt a sense of safety. The wildness outside no longer seemed threatening. Instead, it felt like a part of something larger, a world full of unexpected encounters and unforeseen connections. Clara watched him with interest, her sharp eyes softening as she observed his mannerisms, the way he moved, the way he carried the weight of his past in small gestures. There was a story in him, she could tell, and she was curious to learn it. But she also knew better than to rush a man like him. Trust had to be earned in the frontier, and she could see that Ethan had long ago learned the hard way not to give it freely. When the meal was finished, Clara stood and stretched, glancing out the window at the brightening day. "You should rest a little more if you can. The road is long, and it won't be forgiving if you go unprepared." Ethan nodded, feeling the truth in her words. He lay back on the bed, the blanket pulled snug around him. For a moment he closed his eyes, listening to the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. The world outside was vast and untamed, but inside this little cabin, with this wild girl watching over him in her own quiet way, he felt at peace. As sleep began to reclaim him, Ethan couldn't help but wonder about this strange encounter. Who was she, really? And why did it feel like the beginning of something he hadn't expected? A connection, a bond, perhaps even a chance to belong somewhere. The frontier was full of surprises, he realized. And sometimes the most unexpected moments, like waking up to find a stranger staring at you, could change the course of a man's life forever. Outside, the wind blew gently through the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine and the promise of adventure. Ethan slept on, unguarded but not afraid, while Clara, curious and wild, watched over him, a silent guardian of a new chapter about to unfold. The morning sunlight streamed through the small cabin windows, waking Ethan gently from the deep sleep that had pulled him into its heavy embrace. He stretched slowly, the muscles in his back and shoulders aching, but not as much as the day before. The fire from the previous evening had long since died, leaving only a faint warmth in the air. Ethan rubbed his eyes and took a deep breath, listening to the sounds of the frontier outside, birds calling, leaves rustling, and somewhere far off, the faint trickle of a stream. Clara was already up. She moved around the cabin with a natural ease, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. She had laid out a few supplies on the table, a small pan, some flour, and a jar of water. Her hair was tied back loosely, and there was a light smile on her face as she worked. "Morning," Ethan said, his voice still hoarse from sleep. He noticed how different she looked in the daylight, less wild, more approachable, yet still fierce in her own way. "Morning," Clara replied without looking up. "You slept well, I hope?" "I did," he admitted, glancing around the cabin. "Thanks to you." Clara finally turned to him, a spark of amusement in her eyes. "Don't thank me just yet. You have a long day ahead." Ethan frowned slightly, curious. "A long day? I thought I'd just rest a bit more before heading back onto the road." Clara shook her head. "No, I think you need to move around, get your strength back. There's work to do if you want to survive out here. This isn't a town with inns or stores every few miles. Out here, you have to rely on yourself, and maybe a little on me, if you're lucky." Ethan chuckled softly, realizing that Clara had a playful but serious way of speaking that hinted at both challenge and invitation. "I see. And what exactly do you suggest I do?" Clara pointed to the small clearing just outside the cabin. "First, we'll fetch some water from the stream. Then we'll check the garden and the small animals around here. You'll help me with the chores, and I'll show you some tricks for staying safe in the forest. You might think it's just a quiet place, but out here, danger comes quietly, and often without warning." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in her words. He had traveled through many lands, faced hardships before, but the wild frontier was different. It had its own rules, and its own way of testing those who wandered into it. They stepped outside together, the crisp morning air brushing against their skin. Clara moved confidently, stepping over roots and rocks as if she belonged to the land itself. Ethan followed, careful to match her pace. The stream was not far, a clear ribbon of water winding through the trees. The sound of it trickling over stones was calming, and Ethan crouched down to scoop water into a small metal cup he carried. Clara smiled, watching him. "You're doing fine," she said. "But don't forget, always check the water for signs of danger. Slippery rocks, sudden drops, or animals that might come to drink too. Nature is beautiful, but it isn't always safe." Ethan listened intently, realizing how much he could learn from her. He had wandered alone for years, but he had never had a teacher, someone who could guide him through the subtleties of living in the wilderness. Clara's lessons were practical, but there was something more in the way she spoke, a deep connection to the land, a respect for its rules, and a confidence that came from experience. It was modest, a few rows of vegetables and herbs, but it was well tended and thriving. Ethan noticed her careful hands as she checked the soil, brushed away weeds, and picked ripe vegetables. "Here," she said, handing him a basket. "You'll carry these back to the cabin. And be careful, don't crush anything." Ethan lifted the basket carefully, feeling the weight of responsibility in a way that was new to him. He had traveled lightly for so long, carrying only what he could hold on his back, that the idea of tending to something fragile and living was unfamiliar. But there was satisfaction in it, too, a sense that he was contributing, that he was part of something rather than just passing through. By midday, they had returned to the cabin with their collection of vegetables. Claire started preparing a simple meal, a stew with the fresh ingredients, seasoned lightly with herbs she had gathered. Ethan watched, fascinated by her efficiency. She moved with purpose, yet there was a calmness to her work, a rhythm that made the cabin feel alive. As they ate together, their conversation began to flow more naturally. Clara asked Ethan about his travels, though not too intrusively. He told her stories of dusty roads, small towns, and distant forests, careful to skip the details that were too personal or painful. Clara listened with interest, occasionally laughing at his misadventures or raising an eyebrow at the narrow escapes he described. "You've seen a lot," she said when he finished a story about a stormy night in the mountains. "But it seems like you've been avoiding something too." Ethan looked down at his hands, uncertain how much to reveal. "Maybe," he said finally, "but I'm not sure what I'm looking for. I just keep moving, I guess." Clara nodded, understanding more than she let on. "Sometimes the road is easier than staying in one place, but it doesn't make it better." The afternoon passed quickly as they worked together around the cabin. Ethan learned to chop firewood carefully, how to build a small trap for catching rabbits, and how to spot safe berries versus the ones that could make you sick. Clara's lessons were patient but firm, and she had a way of making even the most difficult tasks feel like a game. During a break, they sat under a large oak tree near the cabin. The wind whispered through the leaves, and the sunlight filtered in dappled patterns on the ground. Clara leaned back on her hands, watching Ethan as he studied the forest around them. "You're different from other travelers," she said softly. "Most people come through here and see only the challenges. They don't notice the beauty or the rhythm of it." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe I've been too busy surviving to notice anything else." Clara smiled faintly, her eyes thoughtful. "Surviving isn't the same as living. Out here you can do both, if you pay attention." There was truth in them, and a gentle challenge as well. He had been moving through life too quickly, focused on getting to the next place, the next moment. But with Clara and the quiet of the frontier around him, he began to realize that slowing down could reveal things he had never seen before. As the day drew to a close, Clara suggested they take a walk along a ridge nearby. The view was breathtaking. Rolling hills stretched to the horizon, and the river below sparkled in the late afternoon sun. Ethan felt a sense of awe he hadn't experienced in years. "You're lucky to see this," Clara said. "Most people rush past the beauty without even noticing it. Out here, you have no choice but to see it and respect it." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He realized that he had never truly appreciated the world around him. He had survived in many places, but he had never truly lived until now. The sun began to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows across the land. Clara and Ethan made their way back to the cabin, tired but content. Inside, they lit a small fire and settled in for the night. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a bond formed not through words alone, but through shared experiences, trust, and the gentle rhythm of life in the frontier. Ethan lay back on the bed, thinking about the day. He had started as a weary traveler, unsure of what he was looking for, and now he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging, even if it was temporary. Clara had challenged him, guided him, and yet left him space to discover things on his own. As sleep began to pull him under again, he realized that the frontier was more than just a place to survive. It was a place to grow, to learn, and perhaps even to find something worth staying for. He glanced toward Clara, who was arranging her own sleeping area near the fire, and felt a quiet gratitude for the unexpected encounter that had brought him here. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and the promise of another day, and Ethan closed his eyes, ready to rest. The frontier was vast and untamed, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The next morning, the sun rose slowly, spilling golden light across the frontier landscape. Ethan woke to the sound of birds chirping and the distant rustle of leaves. He stretched and glanced around the cabin. Clara was already up, moving quietly around the small space as she prepared breakfast. "Morning," he said, still a little groggy. "Morning," Clara replied, not looking up. "We have a busy day ahead." Ethan frowned slightly, curiosity piqued. "Busy? What kind of busy?" Clara set a pan over the fire and handed him a small bowl. "We're going to check the forest today. You need to learn how to find food, water, and shelter if you ever have to survive on your own. You've learned some things already, but there's more out there than just berries and rabbits. You need to understand the signs of the forest." Ethan nodded, understanding the truth in her words. He had wandered the world before, but the frontier was different. It had its own rules, its own rhythms, and those who ignored them often didn't last long. After breakfast, they gathered their supplies and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scents of pine and earth. Clara led the way confidently, her boots crunching on the forest floor. Ethan followed, trying to match her steps while observing everything around him. "Look at the trees," Clara said, stopping near a cluster of pines. "Notice the way they lean and the patterns of the leaves. That tells you which direction the wind usually blows, which can help you find water if you get lost. It also tells you which areas are safe and which might be unstable." Ethan crouched down, studying the trees carefully. He had never thought about nature in this way. To him, a forest had always been something to pass through, not something to read like a book. Clara's guidance made him see it differently. As they moved deeper into the forest, she taught him how to identify edible plants and berries. She showed him how to find roots and nuts, explaining which ones were safe and which ones could make him sick. Ethan listened carefully, asking questions and trying to remember everything. "You have to pay attention to details," Clara said. "The forest won't forgive carelessness. If you don't know what you're eating, it could be the last mistake you ever make. Nature is beautiful, but it isn't kind to the unprepared." Ethan nodded, feeling the seriousness behind her words. He had survived many challenges in his life, but this was different. Here, survival required knowledge and awareness, not just strength or speed. After a few hours, they reached a small clearing where a stream ran quietly, its water clear and cool. Clara knelt by the water, scooping some into her hands and drinking deeply. Ethan followed, feeling the refreshing chill of the water against his skin. "This is a good spot to rest," Clara said. "But remember, even calm water can hide dangers. Always check the edges and be aware of animals that come to drink." Ethan sat beside her, taking a moment to enjoy the peace. The forest around them seemed alive with subtle movement. A squirrel darting up a tree, birds flitting between branches, leaves whispering in the wind. He felt a connection to this place that he had never experienced before, a sense that he was part of something much larger than himself. As they rested, Clara spoke quietly. "You've traveled a long way, haven't you?" Ethan hesitated. "Yes, many miles, many towns, many roads, but I've never really stopped anywhere. I didn't know where I belonged." Clara nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes we wander not because we don't have a home, but because we're afraid to make one. Fear keeps us moving." Ethan considered her words. There was truth in them, and a quiet challenge as well. He had been moving through life too quickly, afraid of attachments, afraid of staying in one place. But with Clara, with the forest around him, he began to see that slowing down could be a strength, not a weakness. After a short break, Clara stood and gestured for Ethan to follow. They continued along the stream, keeping a careful watch for signs of animals. Clara showed him how to read tracks in the mud and identify the calls of different birds and creatures. She taught him to notice the subtle signs of predators nearby and how to move quietly and carefully to avoid them. "Remember," she said, "the forest speaks to those who listen. Every rustle, every snap of a twig, every movement tells a story. If you pay attention, it can save your life." Ethan listened intently, his eyes scanning the ground and the trees. He had never realized how much information could be found in the smallest details. Clara's knowledge amazed him, and he felt a growing respect for her skill and experience. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they reached a small grove filled with wild berries. Clara knelt to pick some, showing Ethan which ones were ripe and safe to eat. He followed her instructions carefully, tasting the sweet fruit and enjoying the simple pleasure of nourishment from the land. "You're learning quickly," Clara said, smiling. "Most people would have given up long before now." Ethan smiled, feeling a quiet pride. He had always survived on his own, but this was different. Here he was learning to thrive, not just to endure. As the day went on, they practiced building a small shelter using branches and leaves. Clara demonstrated how to weave the materials together to create a sturdy structure, and Ethan followed her lead, carefully mimicking her movements. By the time they were finished, the small shelter looked surprisingly solid, a testament to their teamwork. "You did well," Clara said, examining their work. "If you ever need to spend a night in the forest, this will keep you safe and dry." Ethan nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment. He had spent much of his life moving through the world alone, but for the first time he felt a sense of collaboration and purpose. Clara's guidance had transformed what could have been a simple day into a lesson in survival and self-reliance. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they made their way back to the cabin. The forest glowed in the late afternoon light, shadows stretching long across the ground. Ethan felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that he had learned something valuable, not just about the forest, but about himself. That evening, after a simple meal of stew and bread, they sat outside by the fire. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, and the stars began to appear one by one. The quiet of the frontier wrapped around them, comforting and serene. Clara leaned back on her hands, watching the fire. "You're different from other travelers," she said quietly. "Most people come here and see only the challenges. They don't notice the beauty or the lessons. You notice. That makes you rare." Ethan looked at her, surprised by her words. "I've never really had someone teach me," he admitted. "I've always learned the hard way, by making mistakes." Clara smiled softly. "Mistakes are part of learning, but having guidance makes the journey easier and safer. You're learning, Ethan, and that's what matters." The night grew darker, and the temperature began to drop. Ethan pulled the blanket around his shoulders, feeling the warmth and comfort of the small cabin they returned to. He realized that he had come a long way in just one day, not just in skill, but in trust. Clara had not only taught him about the forest, but she had also shown him the value of connection, of working with someone instead of always relying on himself. As he drifted off to sleep that night, Ethan felt a quiet sense of contentment. The frontier was vast and unpredictable, but with Clara's guidance he felt capable of facing whatever challenges might come. He had learned to observe, to listen, and to respect the land, and in doing so, he had also begun to understand a little more about himself. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and earth. The forest was alive, full of hidden paths and unseen creatures, but Ethan no longer felt afraid. He had learned to move with it, to listen to it, and to trust in the lessons it offered. And he had learned that sometimes the greatest challenge was not just surviving in the wilderness, but learning to trust another person, and to accept guidance even when it felt unfamiliar. As sleep claimed him, he thought about the journey ahead. The frontier would test him, no doubt, but he felt ready. And with Clara by his side, he knew that he was not alone in facing whatever the wild had in store. The next morning, Ethan woke to the soft sounds of wind rustling through the trees and the distant chirping of birds. He stretched and felt a quiet sense of readiness. The forest had become a part of him, and each day spent with Clara was teaching him something new, not just about survival, but about himself. Clara was already outside, gathering firewood for breakfast. The sun had just begun to climb over the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the clearing. She moved with confidence, each step purposeful, her eyes scanning the forest as if she could read every sound and movement. Ethan admired her silently for a moment. She was fearless and skilled, yet she carried herself with a calmness that made the wild seem safe. "Morning," Ethan called softly. "Morning," Clara replied without turning. "We have a long day ahead. Today, I want to teach you about navigation. You need to know how to find your way if you ever get lost." Ethan nodded, curiosity stirring inside him. He had walked many roads and seen many towns, but he had never been taught how to truly read the land. Clara's lessons were about more than survival. They were about understanding the forest as if it were alive, a companion rather than an obstacle. They packed a few essentials: a small map Clara had drawn, a compass, some food, and water. Then they set out on a trail that led deeper into the forest. The path was uneven and overgrown in places, but Clara moved easily, her steps confident and precise. Ethan followed, trying to match her pace while keeping an eye on the trail. "Look at the trees," Clara instructed after a while. "Notice the way the moss grows on the north side, the way the branches twist, the shape of the rocks. These are all clues to the direction you're facing." Ethan studied the forest carefully, realizing that there was a language here he had never noticed before. The wind, the trees, even the pattern of sunlight through the leaves. All of it was a guide if you knew how to read it. Clara's words encouraged him to slow down, to pay attention, and to trust his observations. They continued walking for hours, occasionally stopping to check the compass or consult the map. The forest grew denser, the sounds of wildlife more vivid. Clara pointed out bird calls, the tracks of deer, and the distant rustle of small animals. Each discovery was a lesson, and Ethan absorbed it all eagerly. As the sun climbed higher, they reached a small clearing with a gentle stream running through it. Clara knelt by the water and gestured for Ethan to do the same. "This is a good spot to rest and refill your water supply," she said. "Always know where water is. You can survive longer without food than without water." Ethan knelt beside her, cupping the cool water in his hands. It felt refreshing, almost revitalizing. "How did you learn all of this?" he asked, genuinely curious. Clara smiled faintly. "Years of practice, observation, and a lot of mistakes. The forest teaches you if you're willing to listen. You just have to pay attention and respect it." Ethan nodded, feeling the truth of her words. He had spent much of his life rushing from place to place, trying to survive and avoid trouble. But here, with Clara guiding him, he was learning to live, to observe, and to understand the world around him. After a short rest, they began their journey back toward the cabin. But as they navigated through a narrow path lined with thick trees, Clara froze suddenly. She held up a hand, signaling Ethan to stop. Her eyes scanned the area carefully, sharp and alert. "What is it?" Ethan whispered. "Quiet," Clara replied. "Something's moving in the underbrush." "Stay calm and follow my lead." Ethan's heart raced. He had learned to respect the forest, but moments like this reminded him that it could be unpredictable. Clara stepped forward slowly, her movements deliberate. Ethan followed, keeping his own steps light and careful. They reached the edge of the clearing and saw a family of deer grazing quietly, unaware of their presence. Clara exhaled softly and smiled. "See? Not all surprises are dangerous, but it's important to stay aware. The forest has eyes everywhere, and it watches everything you do." Ethan nodded, impressed by her ability to remain calm and alert. He realized that being prepared wasn't just about tools or skills. It was also about mindset. Clara's calm confidence was as important as her knowledge, and he wanted to learn that same balance. As they continued walking, they noticed dark clouds gathering in the sky. A storm was approaching, and the wind picked up, rustling the trees with increasing intensity. Clara glanced at Ethan, her expression serious. "We need to get back to the cabin before the storm hits. Lightning can strike without warning, and the forest becomes dangerous when the ground is wet and slippery." They picked up their pace, moving quickly but carefully through the forest. The first drops of rain began to fall, light at first but growing heavier by the minute. Ethan felt the water soaking his clothes, cooling his skin, but he kept moving, trusting Clara's lead. When they finally reached the cabin, they were soaked but safe. Clara immediately set about securing the doors and windows, making sure the firewood was protected. Ethan helped as best he could, learning quickly from her efficiency. Together they worked in quiet coordination, the storm raging outside while the cabin offered shelter and safety. Once the cabin was secure, they sat by the fire, drying off and warming themselves. The storm continued outside, rain hammering against the roof, wind bending the trees. Ethan watched Clara carefully, noticing the way she remained calm even as the storm tested their small haven. "You handled that well," he said, breaking the silence. "I don't think I would have known what to do without you." Clara shrugged, a faint smile on her face. "You'll learn. That's the point. Every challenge is a lesson if you're willing to see it that way." Ethan nodded, feeling the truth in her words. He had faced many difficulties in his life, but today's storm reminded him that the frontier was unpredictable. It required not just skill, but awareness, patience, and trust in those around you. As the rain continued, they shared a simple meal and talked quietly. Clara told stories of her own experiences in the forest, lessons learned, mistakes made, and discoveries that had shaped her understanding of the land. Ethan listened intently, realizing that each story carried wisdom far beyond mere survival. "You make it sound so easy," he said at one point, smiling. Clara laughed softly. "It's not easy. Nothing out here is. But it's rewarding. You see the world in a way most people never will. You learn to respect it, and in return, it teaches you things you can't learn anywhere else. Ethan considered her words, feeling a growing respect for the wilderness and for Clara. He realized that he had been wandering aimlessly for years, but now he was learning to move with purpose, to observe, and to grow stronger with each challenge. As the storm began to subside, the sky clearing and the forest glistening with rain, Ethan felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. They had faced the unpredictable forces of nature together, and he had learned not just about survival, but about trust, patience, and resilience. Clara leaned back against the wall, looking at him with a faint smile. "You're learning fast. I think you'll do well out here, as long as you keep paying attention." Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "Thanks, Clara. I think I'm starting to understand." The evening passed quietly, the storm now just a memory, leaving the forest refreshed and alive. Ethan lay back on his bed, thinking about the day's lessons and the bond he was forming with Clara. The frontier was vast and challenging, but he no longer felt alone. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of confidence and purpose. The challenges he faced today had tested him, but he had met them, learned from them, and grown stronger. And with Clara by his side, he felt ready to face whatever the frontier might bring next. As sleep claimed him, Ethan reflected on the journey so far. The storm had been a test, not just of skill, but of trust. He had learned to rely on Clara, to observe the land, and to respect the power of the wilderness. The frontier was unpredictable, but he was learning to navigate it, one lesson at a time. Outside, the forest was quiet, the rain having washed away the traces of the storm. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of new challenges and discoveries. Ethan slept peacefully, ready to face whatever the frontier had in store, confident in his growing skills and in the bond he shared with Clara. The next morning, Ethan woke to a calm, golden light spilling through the cabin windows. The forest outside was quiet, almost serene, the recent storm having washed the leaves and paths clean. He stretched and felt a rare sense of peace. The days spent with Clara had changed him. He no longer felt like a wanderer without direction, but someone who belonged, at least in part, to this wild, beautiful land. Clara was already outside, tending to the small garden and gathering firewood. Ethan stepped out behind her, careful not to make a sound. The soft rustle of leaves, the distant calls of birds, and the gentle gurgle of the stream nearby made the morning feel alive. "Morning," he said, his voice calm. Clara looked up and smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. "Ready for today?" Ethan nodded. "Yes. What's the plan?" Clara gestured toward the forest edge. "Today we go further. I want to show you a spot few people know about. A place where the river widens, the land opens, and you can see the entire valley. It's beautiful, but the path is tricky. You'll need to pay attention and follow instructions." Ethan felt a surge of excitement. He had faced challenges before, but this promised more than just survival lessons. It was a chance to see the frontier's beauty in a way few people ever did. He followed Clara closely as they moved through the forest, her steps confident and precise. He observed everything, noticing how she read the land, the wind, and even the subtle sounds of animals nearby. "Look here," Clara said, stopping at a small clearing. She knelt beside a cluster of rocks. "See these marks? They show the path others have used. The forest has a memory. You just need to learn to read it." Ethan studied the rocks, amazed by the simplicity and clarity of the signs. Clara's knowledge made the forest feel less intimidating, more like a living companion than a threat. He began to understand that survival wasn't just about skill. It was about awareness, patience, and respect. They continued their trek, the path winding through thick trees and over uneven ground. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows and dappling the forest floor with light. Ethan marveled at the quiet beauty surrounding him, the way the trees seemed to whisper secrets, the way the wind played among the branches. For the first time in years, he felt fully present, fully alive. After some time, they reached a narrow ridge. Below them, the valley stretched endlessly, the river winding like a silver ribbon through the green landscape. The sight took Ethan's breath away. "It's incredible," he said softly, gazing at the view. Clara smiled, standing beside him. "Few people see it like this. You have to work to get here, to understand the land, to respect it, and now you're here, which means you've earned it." Ethan felt a deep sense of accomplishment, not just for reaching the ridge, but for everything he had learned along the way. The frontier had tested him, taught him, and guided him, and he had risen to meet its challenges. He realized that his journey wasn't just about survival. It was about discovery, about finding strength within himself and trust in those who guided him. As they stood together, a quiet wind brushing against their faces, Clara spoke. "Ethan, you've come far in a short time. You've learned to read the forest, to survive, and to trust. But there's one more thing you need to understand." Ethan looked at her, curious. "What's that?" Clara's eyes softened. "The frontier isn't just about the land. It's about connection. With the land, with others, and even with yourself. You've learned to rely on me, to trust in what I show you. But now you need to decide if you're ready to trust in more than just survival." Ethan considered her words carefully. He thought about the long road he had traveled, the loneliness he had felt, and the people he had met along the way. He thought about Clara, the way she had guided him, challenged him, and yet given him space to learn and grow. He realized that he was ready. "I trust you," he said finally, his voice steady. "Not just in the forest, but in everything." Clara's smile widened, a mixture of relief and joy. "That's the last lesson the frontier has for you today." They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the ridge and the valley below. Clara showed him hidden streams, small groves filled with wildflowers, and places where the forest opened to sunlight in a way that felt almost magical. Ethan listened, learned, and marveled at the beauty around him. He realized that the frontier was more than just a place to survive. It was a place to live, to feel, and to grow. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange, pink, and purple, they made their way back to the cabin. The forest glowed in the fading light, each tree and rock bathed in the warm colors of the evening. Ethan felt a quiet sense of contentment, knowing that he had found something he had been searching for all his life. Not just a place to rest, but a sense of belonging. The warmth of the flames and the comfort of shared company made the evening feel peaceful and complete. Ethan watched Clara as she moved about the cabin, her presence calm and confident, yet filled with a gentle energy that made everything feel alive. "Ethan," Clara said softly, sitting down beside him, "you've come a long way. I've seen you learn, grow, and trust. And now, I think it's time you understand something about yourself, too." Ethan looked at her, intrigued.
"What do you mean?"
Clara reached out and took his hand gently. "You're not just a traveler anymore. You've found a place in this land, and a place in my life. You're part of this frontier now, not just passing through, but truly belonging. And I want you to stay with me. Forever, if you choose." Ethan felt a rush of emotion. He had wandered for so long, searching for something he couldn't name. And now, standing here with Clara, he realized that he had found it. Not just safety, not just knowledge, but a connection, a bond that was deeper than anything he had ever experienced. I want that too," he said quietly. "I've been searching for a long time, and now I know. This is where I belong. With you. With this land." Clara's eyes sparkled with warmth and relief. She squeezed his hand, her grip firm yet gentle. Then it settled. "You're part of this frontier and part of my life, forever." The evening grew darker, the stars appearing one by one in the clear night sky. Ethan and Clara sat together outside the cabin, watching the constellations and listening to the quiet sounds of the forest. The wind whispered through the trees, the river gurgled softly in the distance, and the world felt alive and full of possibility. Ethan realized that he had come a long way, from a weary traveler sleeping alone in a cabin, to a man who had found trust, connection, and belonging. The frontier had tested him, taught him, and guided him, and now he had embraced it fully, not just for survival, but for life itself. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, and Ethan felt a sense of peace he had never known. The forest, the land, and the quiet strength of the frontier girl had claimed a part of him, just as he had claimed a part of it. Together, they would face whatever the future held, grounded in trust, friendship, and a shared love for the wild beauty around them. As the night deepened, the cabin glowing softly from the firelight, Ethan thought about the journey he had traveled. He realized that every step, every challenge, every lesson had led him to this moment. He had found more than a home in the frontier. He had found a life worth staying for, and a heart worth trusting. The stars twinkled above, the forest settled into a calm lull, and Ethan closed his eyes with Clara beside him, knowing that he was finally home. The frontier was vast and unpredictable, but for the first time he felt ready to face it all, with her and with the land that had taught him to see, trust, and belong. And in that quiet moment, under the vast sky, the wind through the trees, and the steady warmth of the fire, Ethan understood that the greatest lesson of all was not about survival or skill. It was about connection, trust, and the courage to embrace life fully. The frontier had given him everything he needed: knowledge, challenges, and, most importantly, love and companionship. And for the first time, he knew he would never wander alone again,